The dust rose in thick, choking clouds as horses stamped and wagons creaked along the edge of Red Creek. It was auction day livestock, tools, land deeds. And sometimes, when the law looked the other way, human beings. The townspeople gathered in uneasy excitement beneath the harsh afternoon sun, their voices mixing with the clang of metal and the sharp calls of traders. No one spoke openly about the ugliness of it, but everyone knew what kind of auction this truly was. Caleb Hart stood at the outer edge of the crowd, his hat pulled low, his jaw set tight. He was not a man who came to town often. His ranch lay miles beyond the last fence post where the land turned wild and the rules of men blurred. He had come only to sell a few head of cattle and buy winter supplies. Yet something had pulled him toward the auction platform, a feeling he could not name, like a hand closing around his chest. The auctioneer's voice cracked loudly through the heat. Next lot. Recovered from a raiding party near the southern ridge. Strong, healthy, valuable. Full-blood Apache woman. A ripple moved through the crowd whispers, crude laughter, greedy appraisal. Caleb stiffened. He had seen many wrongs in his life, but this one struck deeper, sharper. 2 armed guards led her forward. She was barefoot. Her wrists were bound with rope, not iron, as if that made it gentler. Her dark hair fell in a thick cascade down her back, catching the light like black silk. Bruises faded along her arms and shoulder. Yet what stunned the crowd into sudden silence was her face. She was undeniably beautiful, but it was not the kind of beauty meant for possession. It was the wild beauty of canyon cliffs after rain, of fire reflected in river water. Her eyes, dark and steady, scanned the crowd without fear, only a deep, burning alertness. She stood straight despite the chains on her life. Caleb felt something twist violently inside him. This is wrong, he thought. Every inch of it. The auctioneer lifted his hammer. Bidding starts at $50. A man near the front shouted, 60, 70, 80. Each number struck like a hammer inside Caleb's skull. Every bid was another man claiming ownership over a human soul. He told himself to turn away. He had no place here. He was no hero. He was a rancher with debts dropped behind him, and a barn roof that needed repair. But when the woman's eyes flicked toward him for just a second sharp, desperate, silent, his body made the decision his mind could not. 90, he said. The crowd turned in surprise. Caleb rarely spoke, and when he did, men listened. He stepped forward into the open, his boots crunching against the dirt. 100. A trader barked, glaring. 110, Caleb answered without hesitation. The price climbed fast. Each bid made his stomach knot tighter. He was buying supplies with the money in his pocket winter feed, fencing wire seed. And yet, he kept raising his hand. The auctioneer's eyes glittered. 150. Do I hear 170? 170, Caleb said. The trader hesitated. The crowd murmured. The woman's breathing grew faster, though she did not beg, did not cry. She simply watched, as if carving every face into memory. The trader cursed under his breath, but lifted his hand. 180. Caleb closed his eyes for a split second. His ranch account would be nearly empty. Everything he'd saved. Every risk. 200, he said. Silence. The trader shook his head with a snort. She ain't worth that. The hammer slammed down. Sold. To Mr. Hart for $200. A sharp gasp rippled through the onlookers. Some scoffed. Some laughed outright. Others looked uneasy, as if they had just witnessed something they did not fully understand. $200. For a human life. The guards untied the rope from the post and shoved it into Caleb's hands. When he reached for it, his fingers brushed against the woman's skin. She flinched, just slightly, but did not pull away. Her eyes lifted to his face, defiant, searching. I'm not your master, he he said quietly, bending close so only she could hear. "I bought your freedom. As much freedom as I can give you in this cursed place." She did not answer. She did not yet trust the shape of his words. The traitor scoffed. "You're a fool, Hart. You could have made a profit on her." Caleb's eyes hardened. "I don't trade in flesh." The crowd began to disperse as the next lot was brought forward. To them, it was just another transaction concluded. To Caleb, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the ground behind him had already crumbled away. He led her toward his horse. She walked beside him silently, her movements cautious but steady. Every step carried the weight of what had been stolen from her family. Her land, her name dot at the water trough near the hitching posts. Caleb paused. He drew a knife from his belt slowly, carefully, so she would not mistake his intent. Her muscles tightened, ready for flight or fight. He cut the rope from her wrists. "You can run," he said. "I won't stop you." She stared at her freed hands as if they might vanish. Then at him. Her brows drew together, suspicion etched deep. "You? Buy and let go?" she asked in broken English. Her voice was low and rough from dust and fear. "Yes. Why?" Caleb hesitated. How could he explain that some nights he woke up choking on the memory of the men he hadn't saved? That he had lost a wife to fever and buried hope beneath the prairie soil? That maybe, just maybe, this was a way to make one wrong less heavy? "Because I couldn't stand to watch it happen," he said finally. Wind tugged at her hair. The crowd's noise faded around them. She studied him like a wounded animal studies an open hand. "I am called Ayanna," she said at last. "It means eternal flower." Caleb swallowed. "I'm Caleb." She did not run. Instead, she took one careful step closer to him, as if testing the earth beneath her feet. This was the moment everything changed, though neither of them yet understood how completely. The ride from Red Creek to Caleb's ranch stretched long and quiet beneath a bruised purple sky. The sun sank slowly behind the hills, pulling shadows across the land like dark curtains. Ayanna rode behind him on his horse, her hands hovering near his coat but never quite touching. Every movement of the animal made her tense, as though she expected the ground to vanish beneath her at any moment. Caleb kept his pace slow on purpose. He didn't look back often, only enough to make sure she hadn't slipped, fallen, or fled. He could feel her fear behind him like a living thing, sharp and trembling. He told himself that fear wasn't of him alone. It was of every man who had ever claimed power over her. The land opened as they crossed the ridge. His ranch came into view, a weathered cabin, a barn leaning slightly to the west, a line of cottonwood trees near the creek. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney where he had banked the fire that morning. It was modest, quiet, isolated. Ayanna studied it closely. No fences holding in people. No guards. Just open earth and stillness. When the horse stopped, Caleb dismounted first and offered his hand. She watched it with suspicion before finally taking it. Her fingers were cold. When her feet met the ground, she staggered slightly, unused to the long ride. Instinctively, he steadied her by the elbow, then let go at once. Inside the cabin, warmth lingered from the earlier fire. The single room held a rough wooden table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed pushed against the far wall, and a small stove. It smelled of cedar smoke and dried herbs. Nothing about it spoke of wealth or power, only survival. Ayanna stepped in as though entering enemy territory. Her eyes swept every corner, every shadow. She noted the door, the windows, the knife hanging near the stove. Her shoulders stayed rigid, prepared. Caleb removed his hat and set it on the table. "You're safe here," he said softly. "No one knows you're with me. No one will come for you." Her gaze sharpened. "No one wants me back?" she asked. "No." That word landed between them with a weight neither of them fully understood, freedom wrapped in uncertainty. He poured water into a tin cup and set it on the table, then another. He handed one to her without touching her. She hesitated, then drank deeply. Some of the water spilled down her chin. She wiped it away quickly, as if embarrassed to show need. From a small chest beneath the bed, Caleb pulled out a folded dress, his late wife's, simple cotton, blue with small white flowers. He laid it on the chair. "You can change if you want," he said. "I'll be outside." Her eyes flicked between the dress and the door. "You leave?" "Yes." She studied him for a long moment, hunting for deceit. Finding none, she gave a single stiff nod. Outside, the wind had cooled. The first stars pierced the darkening sky. Caleb leaned against the fence rail and exhaled slowly, his chest tight. He had bought her freedom, yes, but freedom alone did not heal fear. He had brought a stranger to his home, a wounded one. A dangerous kindness, some might say. Minutes passed. Then more. The cabin door creaked open. Ayanna stepped out wearing the blue dress. It hung loosely on her slender frame, far from tailored, but it covered the bruises and the dust of the road. Her hair still fell loose down her back. The effect was startling, not because she looked like a possession now, but because she looked suddenly, unmistakably human again. Caleb looked away quickly, aware of the heat rising to his face. "There's stew on the stove," he said. "It's not much, but it's warm." They ate in silence at the small table. The only sound was the scrape of spoons and the soft hiss of firewood shifting in the stove. Ayanna ate slowly at first, as if expecting the food to be taken away. Then hunger overtook restraint, and she began to eat more quickly, eyes lowered. When she finished, she pulled back, tense again, waiting. "You can sleep in the bed," Caleb said at once. "I'll take the floor." Confusion crossed her features. "You own house. You sleep on ground?" "I don't own you," he replied. That struck something in her. Her lips parted as if she meant to speak, then closed again. He laid out a blanket near the fire and settled down at a distance that felt safe to her. The firelight painted moving shadows on the walls. Night settled in thick and heavy around the cabin. Sleep did not come easily. Not for either of them. Sometime deep into the night, a strangled sound tore from Ayanna's throat. She bolted upright in the bed, eyes wide and unseeing, breath ragged. Her hands clawed at the air, caught in some nightmare that had dragged itself into waking. Caleb was on his feet in an instant, but he stopped a few steps away. "Careful not to rush her, Ayanna," he said quietly. "You're here. You're safe." She could not hear him at first. Her body shook violently. Sweat soaked her hairline. Then slowly, painfully, her gaze found him. Recognition flickered, weak but real. "They always come back," she whispered hoarsely. "They always take me again." He swallowed. "Not here." Her breathing slowed in shallow, broken pulls. After a long moment, she said, "In my village." The fire kept the spirits away. When it died, the darkness entered the dreams. Caleb stirred the coals and fed the flame until it burned steady and bright. The firelight pushed back the shadows. She watched in silence. A long time passed before she spoke again. "You could have sold me. I heard them say how much I was worth. Yes. Why did you not?" Caleb stared into the flames. The truth rose in him like an ache. "Because once, a long time ago, someone saved me. And I was too broken to understand why. I never got to repay that debt. Maybe this is how I start." Ayanna studied the side of his face lit by firelight. For the first time, she saw not a buyer, not a rancher, not a threat, but a man carrying grief heavy enough to bend his shoulders. Silence returned. Different now. Softer. Eventually, exhaustion overtook fear. Ayanna lay back down, one hand clutching the edge of the blanket. Her breathing deepened, uneven but real. Caleb remained awake long after she slept out near dawn. When the world was still blue with early light, Ayanna stirred again, this time without panic. She rose quietly and moved to the door. She opened it and stepped outside. Caleb followed at a respectful distance. Mist hovered over the creek. The earth smelled wet and waking. Ayanna took off her shoes and pressed her bare feet into the damp grass. She closed her eyes as if feeling the land speak in a language older than pain. "This land," she said softly, "does not hate me." Caleb answered, "It doesn't hate anyone. It only remembers." She turned to him. Something had changed in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but the first fragile crack in terror where trust might someday grow. "If I stay," she said slowly, "I stay by my own will." He nodded. "That's the only way you'd ever stay." She studied him for a long moment. Then she said the words that would echo through both their lives. "I will remain." For now. In that quiet dawn, beneath a sky just beginning to burn with sunrise, two strangers stood on the edge of something neither of them yet understood, no longer captor and captive. Not yet husband and wife, but something fragile and unprecedented. Two wounded people choosing not to run from the same fire. 3 days passed in uneasy peace. By daylight, the ranch settled into a fragile routine. Ayanna rose early, always before the sun, as if afraid of wasting the quiet hours when no one could demand anything from her. She helped without being asked, gathering eggs, drawing water from the well, feeding the horses with careful, practiced movements. She worked not like a guest, but like someone still trying to earn the right to exist. Caleb watched her from a distance. He never ordered, never rushed. Yet he could see how deeply fear lived beneath her skin. Even a dropped tool made her flinch. Even his shadow startled her when it crossed the ground. Too suddenly. Trust was growing, but it was thin as frost. On the morning of the 4th day, the wind changed. Caleb felt it in his bones before he saw it. Horses, more than one. Coming fast. Dust rose along the distant ridge. Ayanna stood at the creek rinsing cloth when she heard the thunder of hooves. The color drained from her face so quickly it frightened him. She looked at the ridge, then at him. "They have found me," she whispered. Caleb already had his rifle in hand. 3 riders crested the hill. Their coats were town-cut, not ranch-worn. Their horses were well-fed. One wore the same battered brown hat as the trader from the auction. The men pulled up hard at the fence. "Well now," the trader called with a crooked grin, "you sure rode off in a hurry with my property." Ayanna moved backward instinctively, stopping only when her back touched the cabin wall. Her breath came in terrified gasps. Caleb stepped forward, placing himself between her and the riders. "She's not your property," he said calmly. "She's free," the trader laughed. "Free? You paid $200 for her. That makes her yours." "That made her free," Caleb replied. Money changed hands. Ownership ended. The man to the trader's left spat into the dirt. "You don't get to rewrite how things work, Hart. The buyer owns the item. She is not an item." The trader's eyes hardened. "You got soft, rancher. Town says you're keeping her like a wife. Is that true?" Ayanna trembled violently behind him. Every word cut into her like a blade. Caleb did not answer the insult. He adjusted his rifle slightly. Not threatening. Not yielding. "You leave now," he said. "There's no business for you here." The trader's smile vanished. "We got business. That girl was already paid for twice over before you outbid us. One of our clients wants her. We're here to collect." Fear surged through Ayanna in a choking wave. She fell to her knees without realizing it, clutching her arms as if trying to disappear inside herself. "Take me," she whispered. Do not hurt him." Caleb's voice cut sharply through the moment. "Get up, Ayanna." She hesitated. I said, "Get up." There was something in his tone she had never heard directed at her before, not command, not ownership, but unwavering protection. She rose shakily to her feet behind him. The traitor smirked. "She still knows who holds the power." Caleb's gaze never left the writer's face. "The only power you hold right now is what I allow." For a heartbeat, the world still died, then the traitor's hand drifted toward his holster. The shot cracked through the dry air like thunder splitting stone. Caleb fired first, not at flesh, but at the traitor's horse. The animal screamed and collapsed, throwing its rider hard into the dirt. Chaos erupted. One of the other men drew his pistol. Caleb fired again, striking the ground inches from the man's feet. The warning was unmistakable. "Leave," Caleb roared. "Now." The men hesitated, terrified now, glare and shame warring in their eyes. With the traitor groaning in the dust and his horse shrieking in pain, calculation won out over pride. One rider leaned down, hauled the fallen man up behind him, and they fled in a churn of dust and curses. The ridge swallowed them. Silence crashed down. Ayanna's knees buckled again, this time not in terror, but in aftermath. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground. His arms closed around her in pure reflex, holding her upright as her strength gave out. "They will return," she sobbed into his chest. "They always return." His arms tightened around her without thought, without fear of crossing lines. Right now, she was only a woman shaking in terror. "Not this time," he said quietly. "Not while I breathe." She clung to his coat like a lifeline. Inside the cabin, Caleb cleaned the blood from the shallow graze on her arm, the only injury she had taken when she stumbled against the wall. His hands were steady, gentle, the same hands that moments earlier had fired with deadly precision. When he finished, she did not pull away. "You could have let me go," she said faintly. "You could have saved your land and your life." "I could not live with that," he replied. She searched his face. "Why will you risk everything for one woman?" Caleb hesitated, the truth heavy on his tongue. "Because once, long before you, I watched men take someone I loved. And I did nothing because I was afraid. I will not be that man again." Outside, the wounded horse's cries had faded into the distance. That night, fear returned with full force. As darkness fell, Ayanna refused to leave Caleb's side. She sat near him by the fire, her shoulder almost touching his. Every sound outside made her jump. Every shadow stretched into the shape of men coming to take her. When sleep finally dragged him under, her scream tore through the cabin again, but this time, when he reached her, she did not recoil. She threw her arms around his neck and wept. "They chained my mother to a wagon," she cried through broken breath. "They beat my father until he could no longer rise. I was hidden beneath the floor until soldiers pulled me out by my hair. They sold me again and again. Every man said I belonged to him." Caleb held her as if she might shatter. Every word burned into him with an anger so fierce it shook his hands. "You belong to yourself," he said fiercely. "To no one else." Her crying slowed. Her forehead rested against his shoulder. "Then why does my heart feel like it is still in chains?" He had no easy answer for that kind of wound. Only presence. Only time. By early morning, she slept against him by the dying fire. He did not move. Not even when his legs numbed. He stayed still, guarding her dreams like a vow carved into bone. At first light, Ayanna woke to find herself wrapped in his arms. Panic flared, then faded as memory returned. The riders. The gunfire. The way he had placed himself between her and death without hesitation. Her hand rested against his chest. She could feel his heart beating, strong, steady, real. She lifted her eyes to his face. "Your land will be taken," she whispered. They will use law instead of guns. Let them try. She swallowed. Then I will stay. Not from fear. From choice. His breath caught. And if they kill you? She asked quietly. Then I'll die standing where I chose to stand. Her fingers tightened on his shirt. Something new passed between them in that moment. No longer only rescue and refuge, but the dangerous, fragile beginnings of devotion. Outside, the sun rose over the ranch again, but the storm had not passed. It had only begun to gather. The warning arrived 3 days later in the form of a folded paper, nailed to Caleb's fence post. He found it at dawn while checking the perimeter. The note was terse, written in a sharp, angry hand. You interfered with lawful business. Deliver the Apache woman to Red Creek by sundown Friday, or the law will take her and your land with her. Caleb crushed the paper in his fist. Inside the cabin, Ayanna sensed the danger before he spoke. She was grinding corn at the table when he entered, his face drawn tight. She looked up at once. They are coming, she said quietly. Yes, he answered. But not the way they did before. He told her everything. About the traitors' connections. About the sheriff in Red Creek who turned a blind eye when money greased his hands. About how the law could be twisted to declare her a runaway purchase and himself a thief. And the law always wins, she whispered. Only if you stand alone, he replied. She lowered her eyes. Then I will go. Before they destroy you. No, she rose sharply. You cannot keep fighting the whole town for me. I'm not, he said. I'm fighting the lie that says you can be owned. She shook her head, trembling. Your courage will bury you. Maybe, he said softly. But giving you up would bury me first. Silence swelled between them, thick with unspoken terror. By nightfall, Caleb had ridden hard to the only man in the district who might help Judge Whitmore, a retired circuit judge who now lived 2 valleys away. The man owed Caleb a life debt from a winter storm rescue years before. When Caleb returned near midnight, exhausted and bloodied from a fall on the rocky trail, Ayanna was waiting by the fire. Her face twisted when she saw the cut above his brow. What did you do? She whispered. I found a narrow crack in their law, he said, dropping into the chair across from her. A dangerous one. She watched him closely. Tell me, if you are legally my wife, the sheriff cannot seize you as property. Marriage would erase the claim. No traitor can sell what is already bound by law. Her breath stopped. Your wife, she repeated faintly. Yes. She turned away, gripping the edge of the table. Her shoulders trembled, not in fear this time, but in conflict. They trade women as cattle, she said quietly. Now the law would trade me as a wife. Caleb stood slowly and moved closer, careful with every step. This would not be ownership, he said firmly. You would be free under my name, not chained by it. I would never touch you unless you wished it. I swear it. She searched his eyes with painful intensity. Marriage among my people is sacred, she whispered. It is not a shield. It is a binding of souls. I know, he said. That is why I would never force this. Tears slipped down her cheeks without warning. They have already taken everything else sacred from me. The fire cracked loudly. The night pressed close around the cabin. If I do this, she said slowly, they will no longer hunt me as a slave. But the world will still hunt me as an Apache. Yes, and your people will curse you. Already have, he admitted softly. She turned fully to face him. Then why choose such a ruinous path? Because some paths are only revealed when you stop running from them. For a long time, neither spoke. Only the fire answered. Finally, Ayanna lifted her chin. If I do this marriage of paper and threat, it will not be a cage. I will walk as your equal. Or I will not walk at all. You have my word, he said without hesitation. At dawn, they rode together to Red Creek. The town gathered in quiet shock as they passed. Whispers cut through the air like blades. At the courthouse steps, the same sheriff who had allowed the auction scowled as they dismounted. "You got nerve coming back," he said, "and you've got a duty to perform," Caleb replied. Steady as iron, Judge Whitmore is waiting inside. He will witness our marriage this morning. The sheriff laughed harshly. "Marriage don't undo fraud." "Judge Whitmore says it supersedes it," Caleb answered, "provided the bride consents." Every eye turned to Ayanna. She felt the weight of the world crushed down on her centuries of chains, fresh terror. The fragile trust she held in her hands like glass dots. She stepped forward. "I consent," she said clearly. The room fell into stunned silence. Judge Whitmore entered, old but unbowed, leaning hard on his cane. He surveyed the crowd with sharp, weary eyes. "Let us proceed before the courage leaves the room." They stood before him, Caleb in his worn ranch coat, Ayanna in the blue dress that had become her armor. No flowers, no music, only the weight of law and the trembling edge of fate. "Do you, Caleb Hart, take this woman as your lawful wife to safeguard and defend her as your own life?" "I do. And do you, Ayanna, take this man as your lawful husband of your own free will?" She hesitated only one heartbeat, then spoke. "I do." The judge joined their hands. The sheriff's jaw tightened. He said nothing. "You are, by the authority vested in me," Judge Whitmore declared, "husband and wife." The word struck Ayanna like a bell through bone. Wife, a shield, a vow, a danger. Caleb squeezed her hand gently, as if to ask permission even now. Outside, the traitor was waiting. His eyes burned with fury when he saw their joined hands. "You think this ends it?" he hissed. "A marriage won't protect you from men like me." Caleb stepped in front of Ayanna once more. "It already has." The traitor spat. "This isn't over." "I know," Caleb said. That night, back at the ranch, the reality of the day pressed in on both of them. The law now named them husband and wife, but the space between them was full of unspoken questions. Ayanna stood by the door of the cabin bedroom, uncertain. "You may take the bed," she said quietly. "The floor has served me well for too many nights." Caleb shook his head. "We share the roof by law, not by force. We will decide the rest with time." She nodded slowly. They lay on opposite sides of the bed, fully clothed. The narrow space between them charged with fear, tension, and a fragile thread of trust. In the darkness, Ayanna whispered, "Do you regret it?" "No. Even if they kill you for this?" "Especially then." Tears slid silently into her hair. For the first time since her capture, her fate was no longer solely in the hands of enemies. It was bound, however dangerously, to the will of a man who had chosen her life over his own safety. Outside, the wind rose hard against the cabin walls, and somewhere beyond the horizon, vengeance sharpened its knives. The law had declared them husband and wife, but the heart is slower than ink. Days passed under a sky heavy with waiting. The ranch settled again into a tense quiet, the kind that hums with what might come next. Caleb worked from dawn until dark, repairing fences, moving cattle, reinforcing doors and windows. Every creak of leather or echo of a distant hoof set his nerves on edge. Ayanna watched him with eyes that missed nothing. She moved differently now. No longer only a refugee in his home. No longer only a shadow staying close to walls. The word wife had altered the air around her, even if she had not yet claimed it for herself. She helped with the ranch openly, now learning the land's rhythms, the moods of the horses, the smell of rain in the dust before clouds ever formed. Yet at night, the space between them on the bed remained wide. They spoke quietly, carefully, as if every word might tip something fragile into breaking. Still, change was happening in ways neither of them could stop. One evening, a week after the marriage, Thunder rolled unexpectedly across the plains. A sudden storm tore out of the west, wind lashing the cottonwoods violently. The cattle grew restless in the corral. One of the barn doors slammed loose with a crack like a gunshot. Caleb was in the barn when it happened. Ayanna heard the shout first. Fear struck her like a lightning bolt. She ran through the rain without thinking, skirt soaked instantly, hair plastered to her face. Inside the barn she found him pinned partially beneath a fallen beam, blood streaking his temple. "Caleb!" she cried. He was conscious but dazed, breath coming hard. Beam broke. When the door tore loose, she did not hesitate. She wedged her shoulder against the heavy timber and pushed with everything she had. The beam shifted an inch, then another. Pain tore through her muscles, but fear was stronger than pain. With a strangled cry, she lifted just enough for him to drag himself free. He collapsed onto the straw, gasping. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the roar of rain against the roof filled the space. "You came?" he said finally. Her hands were shaking violently as she tore fabric from her sleeve and pressed it to the wound on his head. "Of course I came," she whispered fiercely. "You think I would let the storm take you after everything we have fought?" "Everything we have fought." The word stayed between them like a living thing. That night, fever took him. Ayanna did not leave his side. She drew water, cooled his skin, whispered prayers in her own language and in his. Through the long hours before dawn, she held his hand as his body trembled with chills and heat. For the first time, the bed no longer felt like a legal arrangement, but a battlefield shared. At sunrise, the fever broke. Caleb opened his eyes to find her asleep beside him, her head resting against his shoulder, her hand still wrapped around his. For the first time, he did not withdraw. He stayed still so she would not wake too soon. Later that morning, when she woke and realized where she was, panic flickered briefly in her eyes. But it faded when she saw him watching her with no hunger. In his gaze only gratitude and something deeper, quieter, far more dangerous. "Did I cross a line?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "You crossed into my life." "That's not something I would ever call a mistake." Silence followed, not awkward. Not fearful. Real. In the weeks that followed, the threats from Red Creek began to wither. The trader's power weakened under scrutiny from the judge. The sheriff, now watched, kept his distance. The law, once twisted, was forced slowly, grudgingly, into something closer to justice. Freedom, however, did not arrive all at once. It grew like a stubborn green shoot pushing through stone. One afternoon, Ayanna returned from the creek carrying wildflowers in her arms. She laid them along the windowsill inside the cabin. Yellow, purple, white living color in a room that had long known only dust and shadow. "My mother planted these near our lodge," she said softly. "She said they were medicine for the eyes." Caleb watched her from the doorway. "For the eyes?" "Yes. They help you remember that the world still knows how to be beautiful." He nodded, something tightening in his throat. That night, she did not move away from him when he sat beside her by the fire. Another week passed. Then one evening, as the sun sank red and heavy beyond the hills, Ayanna stood outside the cabin and watched the land in silence. Caleb joined her, the space between them narrow but unclaimed. "Among my people," she said quietly. "A marriage is not sealed by words or papers. It is sealed by choice, renewed each day." "I know," he replied. She turned to him slowly. There was no fear in her eyes now, only gravity. "I chose survival when I agreed to marry you before the judge," she said. "Tonight, I choose you." The words struck him like a physical blow. "Are you certain?" he asked, not daring to move. "Yes," she said, "not because you saved me, but because you never tried to own me." He raised one trembling hand and stopped inches from her face. Waiting. She closed the distance herself. Their first kiss was not fire. It was breath, but careful. Meeting of mouths, uncertain, reverent, heavy with everything they had survived. When they parted, both were shaking. That night, the marriage of protection became the marriage of truth. There was no claiming, no taking. Only giving. Only two wounded souls learning how to touch without fear. In the months that followed, rumors traveled far beyond their valley. Some spat her name with hatred, others spoke it with wonder. An Apache woman living openly as a rancher's wife. A man who had defied a town for a woman no law had meant to protect. Life was not suddenly gentle. Hatred still prowled at the edges. Danger still came in the shape of strangers on distant ridges. But now, Ayanna rode beside Caleb as his equal, rifle across her saddle, wind in her loose dark hair. Seasons turned. Winter came hard and white. Spring followed with stubborn green fire. One morning, as dawn painted the land gold, Ayanna stood in the doorway of the cabin and watched Caleb saddle the horses. Her hand rested unconsciously over her belly. When she told him, he could not speak for a long time. He simply pressed his forehead against hers and breathed as if afraid the world might shatter the moment he named his joy. "Our child will be born free," she whispered. "Yes," he said. "Free and loved." Months later, when the baby finally came, the storm that night was the same kind that had once nearly killed him. The kind of storm that breaks old things apart so new ones can stand. Ayanna labored with the same fierce silence that had once terrified men at the auction. At dawn, as the storm passed, a child's cry pierced the newborn light. Caleb held their son with trembling hands. Ayanna watched him with tears in her eyes. "You still think you only bought my freedom?" she asked gently. He looked at their child, then at her. "No," he said quietly. "You gave me mine." On land that had once known chains and blood, a family now stood rooted in choice rather than captivity. The world had tried to sell her. The law had tried to bind her. But in the end, she had remained for only one reason. She had chosen to love, and he had chosen every day to be worthy of that choice.